She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand. Hold up on she frock, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For cock-a-crow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cock-a-crow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck-a-qua. Cock-a-crow, dagaba, donkey, bray, horse, and they even duck-a-qua. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. All day a back down, me now a come home. Inaga jackass yard for fetch the load. Cockle shy hand, bag over shoulder, running by his side. A Rexy and Rover from the farm, them a come. Sun a go down but up the river. Some washing clothes, some folks are bathing at the water. Fisherman, they catch them a bring. From a canoe boat, man, them start offloading. Aymara, Kwakwari, Hail Baka Kuma Kuma, even Lokunani. Aymara, Kwakwari, Hail Baka Kuma Kuma, even Bangameri. Listen to this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country. Them children glad when the weekend come. Out in the yard, them all gather round. Some a play catcher, some making house from straw. Two who come later, a grandma or grandpa. All a sit down just a wait. Moonlight so bright, it's just the right time to listen story or to say a little nursery rhyme. Grandpa voice a echo in the night as he tell the tale. Some picnic are there with fright. Oh, Ligan, Mungeza, Massa Kurma, Bura, Nancy, even Watamuma. Oh, Ligan, Mungeza, Massa Kurma, Bura, Nancy, even Watamuma. Yeah, man, that's the true story that tell the people about life in the country, life in the country.
Hi, good evening, one and all. This is Sharma Solomon. I'm sitting in this evening for my good friend, our dear friend, Mark Benchcop, who is with, as usual, once he is missing, it is professional engagements that he would have to fulfill. So he asked if I can sit in again for him this evening. And this evening, I hope that in our conversations, we can share the sort of discourse that 107.1 Benchcop Radio is known for sharing, so that we can have conversations on topical issues that are affecting the people of Guyana, and how we as Guyanese not only can lend our voices collectively, but the things that we can do to change the circumstances of our reality so that we can have a better Guyana. And we'll cover a few issues this evening. We'll cover a few areas. I told Mark this evening when he called, and I'll put him on the spot. I told him this evening when he called that there are so many things that we can speak about this evening, but he must ensure that I have the amount of time so that I can have the feedback mechanisms, as I like to be very engaging in my conversations, in my discussions with people. I don't speak to people, but I speak with people. It must be that sort of engaging dialogue where I can hear from you and we can have a more interactive session on issues that are affecting each and every one of us. So I hope this evening that, notwithstanding the notice given and notwithstanding the many issues that are affecting us, that we can be able to cover in a very meaningful way the very important ones that at least I find, at least for this moment, very, very interesting. So there are a few areas I want to speak about. And in my conversations, I always set the tone of what is to be expected. And what we want this evening, as we look at the issues, we look at them from a very domestic point of view as Guyanese and see how it also is being shaped at an international level. And how we, as I always say this every time I'm on this show, from a foreign policy perspective, must pay interest in what is being said. So we must not take for granted those factors when we see them at play. So the first issue I want to look at this evening would be the issue of governance and how that relates to a very democratic society. Because many times when we hear about functional democracy, we believe it stops at free and fair elections and not understanding that it entails many more elements, including good governance. And I think that is very important that we want to speak about this evening, the issue of governance and how the issue of governance by the People's Progressive Party, by the government, is affecting or helping Guyanese in terms of their management of the state. I think that's very important. So we think free and fair elections end of the democratic process without understanding the importance of our involvement in functional institutions that allow for good governance. And if the government is allowing that. So for example, things like a free press, and don't allow for independent views. And in Linden, we can attest to that. We can attest to if people can share their views freely on state-owned television. So that in itself, along with so many issues, speak to the issue of governance. So I want us to put that into two segments. As I mentioned earlier, I like to speak on the domestic side of things and the international or foreign policy side of things. So the domestic side of things, as we look at the issue of good governance, where we see whether it's parliament allowing fair, proper debates, whether it is we see the committees and the institutions of government working to ensure accountability and transparency. I think those are elements that we have to look at. So this week, you saw the Public Accounts Committee being reduced to what you can call a farce. There is no justification on a committee that will hold the government accountable on its spending of public funds to not have its business continue, notwithstanding means by which you look to frustrate that committee, even in the absence of parliamentarians, for whatever reason. So for whatever trivial reasons that it may be, a parliamentarian can say, I don't want to come to parliament on the government side. Two of them are missing. No public accounts committee meeting, no means to hold the government accountable. Governance. So in every area of its oversight of the PPP's management of the state, there is an interruption of the issue of governance. And that is where we want to focus in terms of what that means for us in a domestic environment as Guyanese. It creates a very unnerving society. When people can see the sort of absence you saw even in the Natural Resource Fund, the level of oversight. This is a government, this is a nation where there is still the dispute of where the election is. There was a petition 99 before the courts, and not any recognition of the Natural Resource Fund, which is now the principal means by which we are generating the income for the state. We're an idle economy, is not given even the involvement of the member or a member of the opposition, not even the consideration of their nomination. Again, those institutions, no oversight. And I'll come to what that means when you have people who are feeling that they're not being given representation, they're not being given a fair chance and a fair share, what that provokes within a society. And we'll see where the international response becomes very important. So you're not encouraging even a single consideration from the opposition to be on the Natural Resource Fund. But we have opposition representation from a foreign nation, though Guyanese in parentage, foreign nation nevertheless in allegiance, that you can have on the board. And this is not to question. This is not to question the character. This is not to question the competency of the members of the fund. This is to speak on the involvement and the relationship to governance on behalf of a population that is within a disputed election, not given no representation or consideration on such an important board of oversight. So not only the Public Accounts Committee, and this is financial issue, not only on the Natural Resource Fund, but even Parliament as a whole, where you look at legislation that the PPP is going to bring before the House that will carry no oversight in terms of governance. So we cannot claim to be a democratic state if we are not practicing the issue of good governance. And when you have an undemocratic society, especially that which is being perpetrated by the state, then the consequences of people's agitation, of people's willingness to challenge that becomes even more increasing. And I now come to the point of, in having that sort of environment within the past 2 years that the People's Progressive Party would have promoted, in having that environment, it becomes tenuous, it becomes threatening, and it takes into consideration the issue of national interests and international interests. And here comes our biggest stakeholder in our economy, our oil and gas economy in the United States, Exxon. This is where international relations intersect with our foreign policy, in fact, with our local and domestic issues. International relations intersect, and here comes our foreign policy. Our foreign policy, where we hear the announcement of the visit of the US State Department, the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. And people may say, but how does that relate? Because if a very unstable Guyana doesn't mean well for the US, especially at this point in time, with the issue of geopolitics, what is taking place in the Russian-Ukraine war, and how that is playing out with regards to oil. We see that even affecting the issue of the US, Biden's doctrine on now opening up federal lands for them to go after oil. We see State Department representatives going to Venezuela to get not only engagement on national issues of Venezuela, but to get them to commit to giving oil. We see the issue of Saudi Arabia being asked to pump more oil. So an unstable domestic Guyana that the PPP is creating this environment of no good governance, no oversight, continues to agitate people to a point where they're at a resistance stage. When you don't give to people, when you have cost of living, and we'll come to cost of living because the third issue we'll speak about is Guyana as we exist within an oil and gas economy, and where do we see young people and that level of hopelessness as they fit in. So that'll be the third issue that I'll speak on. But back to the issue of this very unstable domestic environment of lack of good governance. We saw what the USAID report stated earlier this year, coming out of last year, that it is important to have a better working relationship between the parties to the extent of shared governance. This is what's coming out of the report, as opposed to a pretentious one Guyana policy that excludes half of the population, showing more so in the decisions being made, for example, as we mentioned in the PAC, no oversight, in the Natural Resource Fund, no oversight, in Parliament, no oversight, and those institutions that promote good governance, no oversight. So you're having these reports, you're having a society that people feel pressured to a point where people recognize it's unstable and it's not tenable. And our international partners, through multinational agencies and companies like Exxon, cannot afford to have such an unstable environment. The US government, based on what is happening in world politics, cannot afford to have such an unstable environment, that you can see where our oil interest now lies. And the US State Department, two of the most powerful agencies that make up the US government outside of the Defense Department, that sets the foreign policy agenda for the United States, is now going to have no less than the US Secretary of State. This is a gentleman who's been all over the world over the past couple of weeks, is finding time to come to Guyana. We must understand that this is Middle East crisis. This is war in Ukraine. This is issues in Asia and relationship with China. Finding the time to come to Guyana. We must understand as Guyanese, what does that mean with our foreign policy? And how do we as Guyanese capitalize on that? So it's not only to have a stable Guyana, it is what can we say to those partners now that they understand the importance of having a stable Guyana. What do we extract from that? We extract these things, and we'll move on from this topic because I want to get to the next one. But I always leave, after showing where the foreign policy and domestic issues become relevant, I leave a perspective. And where do we extract the most from this? Because the Americans are here for their interests. They're here for their interests. Whether it was Kissinger, former Secretary of State, whether it's through the Monroe Doctrine that dictates the Americans' position in the Western Hemisphere, we've always learned that America is about their interest and not necessarily friendship. So the interest of ensuring there is stability in this part of the world, that you're now looking to ensure the satisfaction of what has now become a crisis in the economy and the rippling effect of gas, and I said earlier, Saudi Arabia unwillingness to pump more gas, the gas being reduced, whether it's from Russia, and all of the other compounded issues have now made Guyana an area of interest, more interest. I then encourage the opposition. I then encourage opposition parties. I then encourage civil society. I then encourage each and every Guyanese to say to the Americans, when they hear that the area of governance becomes an issue and the People's Progressive Party, the government, cannot pretentiously claim one Guyana and don't have the sort of oversight to ensure that the wealth of Guyana is given equitable and equal in its distribution to all Guyanese. So that it is not for one class of Guyanese society to continue to get rich, while those who are struggling, whether it's in the public sector, even the private sector, those employees are not getting their increase, they're not having their minimum wage lifted. So even in that level, it becomes important for every Guyanese to then make that claim in our interests, that the state of Guyana, and we'll come to the second issue. I said the third would be island gas. The second issue will be the IRI Republican, the International Republican Institute, conducted a poll earlier this year in January that revealed some very shocking, well, not surprising, but I believe matters that we should be very conscious about in terms of the poll and the results coming out of those polls. But as the perspective goes, what do we extract from this is the maximum of ensuring that the People's Progressive Party, as you saw, the president is also claiming that he's now going to be meeting with the leader of the opposition, something he refused to do with conditions, and now he is doing without conditions. I think those are signs of understanding where we want to extract more in our interests to see that the president and the opposition leader are prepared to honor their constitutional obligation that said in the issue of good governance that they must meet to discuss constitutional issues such as appointment of the police commissioner, judges, whether it is the different constitutional bodies like the Police Service Commission. It is obligated, and we had for 2 years, for no reason, the president saying he is not meeting of his own constitutional obligation because he don't like somebody, but is doing that now. So you see how our domestic issues are going to change if we exploit the maximum of our international relations and the foreign policies that we are going to set to ensure that we have better and good governance. And I leave that perspective with you. However, as respective Guyanese, we choose to go about that through our respective organizations, whether they're trade unions, whether they are political parties, whether they're non-governmental organizations. It is important for us to see where I see the US ambassador is out there meeting with many organizations. I think this is the time you put those issues about where we see the issue of governance and ensure that through the embassy and its State Department, that the US government, understanding the importance and the interest that Guyana is now as an oil economy, and even before, and though they've always played a part in our electoral process, and I've made this point coming out of the 1992 situation and the Carter Center, and those reforms that were made. I think even now, as we have the presence of the Secretary of State, as we have the interests of the United States government, like 1992, we organize to then say what sort of reforms we should be having, whether those reforms are in the electoral system, and we have, just like in 92, where you had counting at the place of polls, you had a new voters list. Those are the things that we should be pushing for now. That it should not be the Attorney General who, in time to come, is saying they're going to introduce a bill in Parliament. Again, no oversight. We see which team the Speaker is playing on, to say what sort of electoral reforms they're going to have. No, electoral reforms must be by consensus. It must go to select committee. It must have the sort of scrutinizing and involvement that takes into consideration, just like in 92. So far as 92 had a postponement of the elections from 90. So it is important now for us to say what it is that we want in any such reforms, as it relates to not only reforms of constitutional issues in the electoral system, but any other reforms, so that those things make to the news of our international partners who've always played a part in our electoral system, 92, 2015, 2006, always been there. 2020, more pronounced than anything else. They've always been there. So I think now is a good time for us to extract as much as we can get as Guyanese in our interests. Now that we see where we have the merger of domestic issues and international issues, and how that sets our foreign policy as a people and what we want out of that. But there was an issue that earlier, again, I'm drinking some local water. We had an issue where a poll was conducted earlier this year. And again, local issues and where we have international relations. This is the International Republican Institution. This is obviously coming from the United States with regards to where they're based and their absolute political interests in ensuring they have a better understanding of where we are as a society, as a state, and they've been conducting some polls. They are also involved in training in terms of having better understanding of our electoral system and the process and where it is. And they've also indicated, and I know persons, if not the institution, don't let me misquote, that they should be involved in participating in our electoral reforms process. So, but let us first understand, what is the International Republican Institution? Again, as Guyanese, you know, many times we are not paying keen attention to the movements and to activities that are taking place in Guyana. And I believe, though we look at institutions and international partners, and as I said earlier, not necessarily friendship, but more in their interest, the interest to see where Guyana is as a society, its level of stability in terms of government, good governance, government handling of public accountability and transparency, government action towards its people. Those measurements are very, very important to the US government, and how they acquire them would be through agencies such as the International Republican Institutions. institution. So don't take matters coming from such an agency, just like you should not take matters coming from the USAID and the reports that they put out last year about the area of governance. Don't take these reports. This is what informs the US State Department. The chief, one of the key policy directive comes from the US State Department. The Secretary of State is going to be here in 2 weeks. So these institutions, these reports, these polls, and the poll was not done only through the institution, it was done through Gallup, one of the most premier polls in the world that runs most of the American polls. You will hear them quoted when CNN say a Gallup poll was done. This was the sort of polling that was done. The background of how the poll was conducted scientifically demonstrates that there may be an error of 2 plus or minus 2%. So it is a poll that even though you may want to question, then you have to understand that it comes with some amount of credibility because of one, what it represents, the US government, and second, what it obtains with regards to information to inform. And what you got out of the poll, I think there are a few things very, very instructive that we must look towards when we see this sort of conversation taking place. So locally, I know people are in bread and butter fight. Listen, it all relates, it all connects. That if you don't pay attention to this, and we'll come to one of the most disturbing things that came out of the poll with regards to our perception as a society with the issue of oil and gas. As I said, that's the third thing we'll speak about after we deal with a few things within the IRI and what those matters coming out of the poll indicate and what it indicated. You have we talked about electoral reforms a few minutes ago and what we want to extract as a people with regards to ensuring we have a fair system. The poll that was conducted said almost 50%, 48 to be exact, percent of Guyanese, their main concern is electoral reforms, constitutional reforms, in particular, electoral reforms. Because we know the bone of contention, bottom line, with regards to power in Guyana, it is conducted at electoral or through the electoral system at elections. So we know if there is no reform, we know if there is lack of trust, as the PPP so far is creating an environment, whether it's the hiring of a new CEO, how it was conducted, whether it's moving ahead with certain legislation to divide Region 4 into 3 parts. This sort of gerrymandering, this sort of social engineering, where we see the issue of ID cards to foreigners, this sort of behavior is ensuring that you move ahead with an electoral reform system and process that excludes, that is going to not have the sort of confidence. And here it is, the poll that was conducted, and as I mentioned earlier, outlining how we see these polls, whether it is for the instructive position of the US government and to also acquire information so as to be informed on what is happening. Almost 50% of the respondents are claiming that the issue of electoral of reforms is very necessary. So to have, again, the issue of good governance, as we mentioned before, where the People's Progressive Party feel it important and stubbornly move ahead to have even the reforms where more than half or just over half the population or just about half the population is saying that this is the most responsive thing that is very necessary, you're not going to have the issue of good governance. Again, we must leverage our claim to those foreign partners. They're the ones who through these agencies are informed. We must let them know also that as they read these reports, the feelings of Guyanese must be responded to. Those feelings that we have must be responded to correspondingly in terms of the action of the government. So the government cannot claim to want to have a reform process that excludes half of the population. It is not only insane, it should be unacceptable to have such a position. So I think that is very telling about where Guyanese see the issues that are very important to them, especially looking at that poll and where 50% of the Guyanese responded. And what are the things that came out also of that poll in terms of where Guyanese are with issues affecting them? That the economy, almost 50%, 48% of the respondents of that poll total on the issues that are affecting them economically add up that the economy remains the most fundamental issue of concern for Guyanese. Fundamental. COVID came in second. Because even though we had a pandemic, and we still do have a pandemic, in terms of all of what is happening, you cannot imagine people who don't have the means and will have to make the sacrifices just because the economics in front of them are so poor, miserable, that the pandemic becomes an issue of life versus livelihood. And people are not going to play with their livelihoods. So people made those tough decisions. And despite the sacrifices made, notwithstanding the environment that people have to exist, people went out to ensure that they can earn and did not satisfy themselves when they return home, because bread went up, every grocery within the store went up, and cost of living is the killer of the issue of bread and butter. That is the reality of the economics in this country. That is the reality. And we said in the third matter, I'll speak on issues within an oil and gas economy. But coming out of the poll, this is where the sentiments of Guyanese, it is at the moment. This is where it lies. It lies at the core of how do they take care of their families, bread and butter. How do they pay their bills? How do they get medication as a pensioner? How do they send their kids to school? How do they ensure that they can pay those utilities when the month comes? Those are the real issues that are affecting Guyanese. And in almost 50% of the population, COVID coming way behind, that remains the focal point. So we'll come to perspectives just now. Again, these are domestic issues that have been gathered by a foreign partner through the International Republican Institution, and just what they would have gathered in terms of data on how Guyanese are responding to those very important questions as to what becomes the most critical issue affecting Guyanese happen to be, and most certainly is, the state of our economy. And as I said, we'll come to the fact that we're in an oil and gas sector. And I keep mentioning that because we hear all the glowing praise that is being showered on the sector. Our economy is set to become the fastest growing in the world. our GDP, and all these things are increasing, but Guyanese continue to not have the increase to take them out of conditions near to poverty. One point of the report noted that at maybe 22%, Guyanese are unable, poor, they can't feed themselves. They can't take care of themselves. This is abject poverty. Abject poverty. People who can't eat food. How could we boast to be an oil and gas economy? Richest nation, we heading in that direction. Exxon reversed our oil output. Our oil output is now moved up to almost 25 to 30 billion barrels of oil. You think the Americans will send their Secretary of State here because we are not in that upper echelons of we're Paris Club, nothing on Guyana anymore. We are sailing in all the glory, but yet still a significant portion of our population live in abject poverty. Can't feed themselves. Can't feed themselves. How do you explain that? Rich oil and gas nation. So these are things that you have to extract when you have an opportunity to show where international relations meet these domestic issues and how they set our foreign policy in relation to us, the people. That relationship must be set by us. What reforms do we want? What sort of programs do we want the government to adopt in terms of whether it's the Natural Resource Fund, whether it's the oversight of the Public Accounts Committee? What do we want? And we must not allow only the issues that get us bogged down, the distractions, or even the hardship to make us not want to resist to have a better Guyana. That is we must push for that. And we must find the means by which we could do that. Of course, within the constitutional framework. People know that as someone who knows to push that limit to ensure that Article 13 works for everyone, so that decisions that are going to be made, that are going to affect you. Article 13 of our Constitution states that as long as any decision that will be made, it should be made in your interests and it should be made with your involvement. This is what Linden went to war for. Nobody spoke to us before they came to bring a burdensome bill on us. We had a right. It is there. That was the essence of the struggles of the 18th of July. It was a struggle to defend and ensure that Article 13 works. That no decision that is going to put people by now, from 2012 to 2022, 10 years, hundreds of billions of dollars would have been extracted from a community that had no means to pay that. That had no means to find that because no new investments were coming in. People to this day are still struggling to feed themselves and to find jobs. And that amount would have been extracted unless people did not say, Article 13 says you cannot do that. I have to be involved. And I'm saying to you, it is not that we're unwilling to pay. It is that we're unable to pay any increase in electricity because of our state that we continue to be in. So that is the sort of attitude that we must now adopt. As I said, when I close these issues out, I put perspective to them in terms of how we interpret the IRI polls, the state of where Guyanese society is, and just what sort of action, based on my perspective, we can approach to have solutions to these issues. we have to speak up. We have to ensure that we don't only watch our brothers and sisters in abject poverty, unable to feed themselves, many of us going through our tough times, and whether it is we have lands that are being bulldozed, whether it is we are desperate to find jobs, whether it is it's hard to feed one's family, we must not let these issues go quietly while we suffer. We have to speak about them. So that is my perspective on what is coming out. I want to also look at just one more issue um, coming out of the IRI poll, and it'll take me into the third matter that we're going to discuss. I know the song said we drink water, mind me business, but the business of my Guyanese brothers and sisters become my business. All right, and I think it becomes each and every one of us should make it our business to be our brother's keeper and to ensure that we live that one people, one nation, one destiny. As chairman of Region 10, I always said to many of the interland communities in particular that they're no less important than the brothers and sisters in Linden. You know, the children who are not having access to the means to have a proper education only because they live in Aichuni or one of the riverine communities should not suffer because we as leaders take for granted that they're any less than the brothers and sisters on the coastline. So it is the same principle apply. As Guyanese, your fellow brothers and sisters are no less than any other Guyanese that should be enjoying the national patrimony of the state of an island gas economy. And this is the third thing that we'll speak on this evening. And then we'll close out on the fourth matter. It's a little light issue that, let me see if I have enough time, if Lemon is giving me enough time. Yes, I have 8 more minutes. So I'll quickly try to get through the issue of island gas. Because coming out of the poll, interestingly, 1% of the respondents to the poll is saying that the issue of island gas is an important issue. 1%. And I have 2 analyses that I drew from that. One being very important, the sort of information and education on the issue of island gas. Many Guyanese want to push in the boat, people who jumping in the car and taxis. People ain't got time with no island gas because they don't see and feel how does it improve their lives. They're keeping the information from us. You can't know. We Exxon had a new area that they're now going after. What do you as Guyanese know about that? How does that, and so the education of the information to keep people in a perpetual state of ignorance is what is being done to Guyanese in the island gas. So we'll focus on that in terms of misinformation and lack of information that keeps people in an ignorant state of not knowing where do they fit into island gas, unless and except told by the government of what island gas means for them. So how do we change that? How do we change that perception? How do we change that fact in essence? How do we change to ensure accountability, transparency, the issue of auditing, the issue of environmental permits within the island gas sector? We are seeing, you imagine, it is funny because it is so unacceptable, not best practice, and so obvious about what is behind not having environmental permits for the most basic developmental program that the government is claiming for island gas. It's as if the EPA don't exist anymore. It is as if you don't need ESIs to ensure that you have environmental social assessment impact. So not only how it affects the environment, but how it affects some of the communities in which these investments are going to go in. You see the issue of the sugar estates, or whether it's Enmore, and the packaging plant be removed. How does this socially impact the community that known for past 200, 300 years, nothing else but sugar? What sort of assessment was done? You are saying you're going to build a bridge to last for decades, and no environmental impact assessment. You're going to cut down mangroves from across the. We have spent billions of dollars to ensure that mangroves provide sea defense. But in the name of all of this is happening in island gas, where only 1% of the people have any confidence in the issue of island gas, because the government through the state is keeping us in a state of ignorance. That's what's happening in island gas. So I think that is my first analysis of it. Why 1%? Because that state of ignorance allows for government to be doing all of these things, and as if it doesn't affect us, because what you don't know, you believe can kill you, right? Well, we hope not, but I think it's very important that we don't try to find out. We should ensure that the state works for us and information is forthcoming, ensuring that those contracts that you're hearing about, whether it's the Amila Falls, you have to know what's happening. And then the second thing, for my belief in terms of the analysis of why people are apprehensive, and maybe I'll throw in a third, but principally the second, is we saw before what investments, island gas at this moment, doesn't represent 11 years of bad investment by the state. Whether it was fiber optic cable, billions of dollars. Whether it was the airport, still incomplete, billions of dollars. Whether it was the one laptop, billions of dollars. Whether it was Oh My, billions came through Oh My. People have not seen the impressions and the lasting, in fact, impressions made by these investments. Skeldon, worst investment ever. Touted at the time to be the most biggest in the nation's history. Absolute and abject failure, Skeldon is. So that sort of apathy is now with Guyanese, that these sort of things are not going to excite you based on a poor track record of how these bigger things, as of to date, oil is going to explode and become bigger. But as of to date, went into absolute failure. That is my second position on why people have, especially young people, express such an apathy or lack of with regards to their interests, as 1% coming out of the IRI poll say that they're interested in the issue of island gas. And, the handling of island gas, and I don't profess to be a specialist, so I make that clear. But you know what? Guyanese, I have an absolute, as any Guyanese, and this is not a by the way. And if you're into psychology, in fact, sociology, it lets you know when you're an absolutist. And I am an absolute owner, as every Guyanese should see themselves. Not part owner, not by the way owner, of the national patrimony of this state. So I have a right to pay an interest. I have a right to ask questions. So do any one of you as Guyanese, to ensure that the government is accountable on the issues of, as we started the program, good governance. As I said before, a democratic society is more than just free and fair elections, which we still have very disputed at this moment, very, very disputed at this moment. Our petition 99 is still before the courts. The issue of good governance, which is part of the parcel of a democratic society, the issue of good governance. So as it relates to the issue of island gas and where we stand, those two analyses stands out for me. But let us not forget, in a multinational agency, it is important for us to know what the position of island gas as an interest to our partners mean more than it means to us. All right, I leave that very ambiguous deliberately, so that when we read some of these information, we understand where our foreign international relations are meeting with our own domestic interests, and where we as a people, I'm telling you, I'm not leaving foreign policy only up to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As I said, if you understand international relations, domestic issues, we're the people on the ground, boots on the ground, see somebody asking about just now, then those are the things that ensure that our presence are on the ground, that we set the foreign policy of the state, or we participate in the setting of the agenda for the foreign policy shaping of the state, where the domestic issues are going to relate to our international agenda. So that as you see these polls coming out and what it speaks in particular to island gas, we must understand if it represents exclusively our interests or someone else's interests. All right? So there's a few other things I want to speak about in an island gas economy, and I really want to speak on the issue of employment quickly, and where the sort of hopelessness of young people in this very island gas economy. You saw earlier this week that Gaisuko workers, if they have gotten a punch to the gut, they got one sharp from our vice president saying that they'll have to minimize, which was being done before, the sugar industry. You're not going to be able to pay sugar workers for the next 4 or 5 years, pay them off to be quiet. You'll have to find jobs for those people. You'll have to ensure the people who are left in the Enmore packaging plant are quickly trained to become specialist operators on some of those machines. You can't pay them all the time, though you may attempt to. You have to ensure those public servants that are already in the society without jobs. You have to ensure even the existing public servants who feel that they're being taken advantage of with regards to the payment that they receive, more so when they look at what is given to them as increase in pay, 3.5%, and racing inflation and cost of living that continues to move way beyond the pay that they are receiving. So these are factors that we have in an island gas economy. These are real issues that are affecting Guyanese every single day. When parents get up and they have to think about $120 more on a bag of bread, it's a real troubling issue, as we look at the poll earlier outlining that we have a large portion of our population, because 30% represents a large portion of this is abject poverty. This is not people in a certain class that can look forward to a meal, and I'll get a little personal. This, as a Muslim, I am fasting at the moment at sunset. At times, I am so hungry, but I know there is food at the end of a certain time. I only imagine, I sympathize. I many times feel so terrible for those who have no food after that sunset moment, because I have felt that hunger for the entire day. I felt that thirst without having any water to drink for the entire day. And that is a state of continuous endurance for about 30% of our people, or however possible they can make it. God bless ourselves as Guyanese, that many of us are innovative, and many times we are our brother's keeper, and we give charity, we give a box of food, we give some groceries, we give some help. But that is how people are getting by in an oil-rich economy. So I want to really bring outside of where the perspective of the analysis is, on why 1% of our population feels so hopeless about oil and gas, that it is owed to the issue of ignorance, deliberate by the government, where we don't see how we as Guyanese fit into that development. And second, it is through the failure of so many of the initiatives that were conducted by the state, whether it's Skeldon and more, whether it's the airport, fiber optics, one laptop, that adds up to even more at this present moment in oil and gas, that have left so many Guyanese hopeless that we don't even see oil and gas being a success because of these past failures. And the issue of us having to endure so much in a very rich society that is out of the issue of jobs and economically where we find ourselves. As even mentioned earlier in the IRI poll, of even over COVID, our economy and the state of the economy remains the general focus of guidance. So I see that the issue of oil and gas, I hope that we pay attention to. I had the good opportunity to hear Professor Clive Thomas this evening speak on the issue of oil and gas. I would advise in the issue to counter that sort of state of ignorance that this government is promoting with the lack of information on the oil and gas sector and the lack of oversight to be held accountable, especially with regards to oil and gas. We cannot forget the Natural Resource Fund and how that was handled. Half the Guyanese population should feel cheated to not have their representative in the opposition to have a say on participation in that board. So that sort of question mark. And you know, I always say to people that if you're going to have questions over certain outcomes, then what lends strength to power is legitimacy. That is one of the principal factors. So whether you got force, whether you know your political people know the elements of power, legitimacy, it's a very critical element of power. And to throw that board up there and all of that, though people are saying give the board a chance, then we must accept that half the population don't feel that way. And it takes away the legitimacy of decisions coming out of that board. So again, it's very important that we understand where those things will affect us if we don't have proper representation on them. So I'll move to close shortly, but before I do that, I want to close on two matters. So we're wrapping the program up. I know I have until 9:30, but this will take us up to that on these two matters. And though we spoke on very hardcore people, we spoke on bread and butter issues, we spoke on the economics, we spoke about how our foreign policies are being shaped through the conversion of our domestic and international issues. Very hardcore stuff. Um, a matter that I commented on my Facebook earlier last week. Um, and I saw my sister Lurley Nesta did a very good job in outlining the history of the Mandela to Eccles Road and where that sort of vision originated from, and even commending those who are part of the execution of this project. But the highlight of that road would have been stolen by the eagle. And many people laugh. Many people laugh that it's a sad joke. It's unfortunate, even historical, what that road represents, and even convenience of what that road represents now. That the centerpiece, indeed, it's in the center, is the eagle. And I want to share a few perspectives on that. Here why. Guyana is one of the premier birding destinations in the world. Guyana is going to be the number one. In fact, National Geographic had us on their cover in looking at the Roraima mountain tops and the last remaining of such in the Precambrian era, and where it makes up the Guyana Shield and those very precious geological structures that still exist. We have some of the most pristine in the world that contributes to thousands and thousands of small, unnoticed, but hundreds of noticeable waterfalls, including Kaichur, that stems all the way. So Guyana is destination paradise in terms of eco representation. The RP eagle, the largest bird of prey in Guyana. So not only eco, in particular, as somebody who worked in Georgetown, you see so many tourists around Georgetown with binoculars looking at birds. People know the birds. This is no joke. You can't put anything there and call it a bird because you call it a bird. It don't work like that. It is either the bird you claim it is or another bird. And we'll come to symbolism to explain just what I'm speaking about. And I want us to understand what it means when it evokes within us a sense of national pride. You know, so we laugh at it. We laugh at it. But the president gave meaning to it. He is the one who said what the claws represent, what the wings. So then you can't give us a 6 for a 9 and tell us it represents that. It is not the representation of a harpy eagle. Story done. You know why I'm so disappointed? Because the president doubled down today to say that people must fall in line to be embraced if we have the objection that what we're looking at is not a bird that represents what they claim as a harpy eagle. There are 10,000 different species of bird in the world, some without feather, some without wings. How you gonna just throw up something then tell people what it is, and it doesn't even resemble the slightest resemblance of the bird you're claiming it to be? And then you're saying to Guyanese that they must accept mediocrity. They must accept it, fall in line, because you're not good Guyanese. As if we are not seeing what we are seeing. That they know RP eagle. You can't give people anything and tell them to take it, and when they object to it, you get an attitude. Unfortunate, a very important piece of infrastructure was completed. And the country spent the entire week, and the president is going to double down this morning to say that we have to accept it, to fall in line. Now I come to the second issue about symbolism. In sociology, you look at a couple of perspectives. Very pronounced perspectives would be conflict theory, uh, functionalists. So whether everyone, everything is in a cycle, everything represents everything. Conflict, we are always in a perpetual struggle and battle with each other. But there's a very important perspective um, that makes up the issue of how do we see our society, and that is symbolic interactionists. So symbolism is important, and people take for granted how important symbolism is in how we as Guyanese embrace it. So a flag is a symbol. You cherish your flag. You don't want to see anything that desecrates your flag happen to it. That's a symbol. That is a perspective within our sociological existence that we look out into the world. We see these symbols as meaning things to us. They bring value to us. We give them value, so much value. This represents my two index fingers. I don't look to offend anyone this evening, but when it's put like this, it makes the sign of a cross. Makes the sign of a cross. So it represents two fingers, but to almost 2 billion Christians, it means something different. That is what symbolic interactionist is about. So you can't give me a symbol that doesn't look anything like what it should represent and then tell me it should evoke within me a certain sense of acceptance and patriotism. When you have 10,000 different species of bird, and that could be anyone, including a crow, including a pigeon, but you are saying it's a harpy eagle. And then today, that we must accept that, to be embraced, fall in line. That sort of language is coming from the president. You know what you call that? Treating shame with shamelessness. Your shame is the best medicine. Shamelessness. Double down. That's the thing. So I don't take it as a joke that we can reward incompetence and then demand from Guyanese that they must accept it by saying, we know what we're looking at. We know what we're looking at. And that's why we're still talking about it. And that is why the president had to address it today, notwithstanding that sort of behavior of saying that we must accept what we see as not being any RP either. Instead, a replication of a figment of somebody's imagination. So we're closing up, and I want to close on the other issue. I said we'll close on two matters. They're not as hardcore as the first three matters we spoke about, which dealt with good governance, which dealt with the issue of the IRI poll, and which dealt with our oil and gas economy and our position as to how we see people existing. I know we just dealt with the issue of the bird. I think it's very important to me. I grew up my entire life around parrots. My mother was obsessed not only with parrots, with chickens, with ducks. My yard is filled with plants. We naturalists. We animal lovers, whether we wanted to or not, we had to. So I am not just speaking because it is an embarrassment that we see on the new road. I'm speaking as somebody who really likes birds. I've gotten to that point. I'm really into birds. Birding is part of destination tourism Guyana. It's big. It's a big money-making industry. You can't just throw anything up there and tell people to accept it. The other thing I want to talk about would be the our athletes. And I left that for last. I leave that for last because I wanted to first express to those athletes um, congratulations. I don't believe when we watch, and I don't want to just single out. I know we have our 1500 runner, and but I want to give the entire team congratulations because in every one of the performers, I don't think there wasn't a smile on the face of us as Guyanese when we saw them performing and how we felt when we knew that they were running and representing the flag. Again, symbolism, the flag, and our nation. So congratulations to each and every one of them. Know that you've made your nation proud. You've made every Guyanese smile. If there was a moment that we all, from every background, felt the need to smile at a moment for Guyana, you did that, and we are a grateful nation for that. Your treatment to those who participated in ensuring that you were given the sort of support that you need or needed, in fact, I commend each and every one of you. The government is with an absolute obligation. Again, you talk sociology, absolutists. Yes, no man is left behind. You hear the Americans, when a man is down, even the bones, they want that body. It represents something, symbolism again. It represents something. They want one person is kidnapped, then they do all that is necessary to ensure that that American is taken care of. It is the same that applies for Guyana. You have to take care of your own. You cannot be a government and sit as a minister. Errors are made and no acknowledgement except a sham to embarrass someone who helped those athletes. And I want to come to that commendation of Brother Nigel Hughes for reaching out to those athletes and ensuring that the basic things that they needed, which included $800 for them to have their COVID tests and also to have their meals after they would have left the athletes' village taken care of. It's the least we could have done. I want to also commend Sister Paula Liverpool, someone I've known my entire life. And I saw the very disappointing hurt on her face to have to explain that what occurred actually occurred, as she was the initiator that the entire episode occurred. You know, it was so embarrassing to see the Athletics Association president attempted to disassociate himself from the sincere help given to our athletes who reached out through their representative for help. Sincerely, it was given. Instead of us saying what was done needed to be corrected, someone felt embarrassed. And because we are so thin-skinned, because we're not politically matured, we went out to discredit an entire event that ridiculously the Athletics Association is saying they had legal instructions not to spend the money. The Athletics Association is saying they don't want political money. So it means I can't make a contribution because I got party card for party. David Hines can't make a contribution. Jaipal Sharma can't make a contribution. All the other politicians shouldn't be making, unless you're probably from the government side. That is a sort of ridiculousness. I hope that the Athletics Association president listens to what he said and how ridiculous it sounded. That we are now going to say to people who want to help our athletes, you're putting conditions on that. So then if I as a Muslim What stops you from saying you don't want my money? Or if somebody's from a different sexual orientation or gender, creed, you're not going to take their money? As you're saying, because they're from a certain political affiliation, you're not going to take their money? This is what this entire episode would have degenerated into, except someone was man enough to accept that there was some error. Then we hastily rushed to the airport to welcome in a very low, cold welcoming that we give to our athletes. For the officials that went to accept our athletes, they did their jobs. Insufficient from the ministry. That is what we give to our athletes. Symbolism means a lot. This is a moment of celebration. These young people place the smiles on faces of Guyanese across this country and the world. And they came home very low-key. Officials were there. End of story. The walk-in to lounge, you're here. End of story. End of story. So I know I have a couple more minutes, but I want to take this time to thank each and every one of you. I hope that we shared. I said to Mark after impromptu, with this impromptu request for me to come on this evening, I said to him that by next week, we'll try to have something a little more structured so that I can bring you a little more insights and have you more involved in our conversation. So we're hoping to do something either next Thursday or Friday to make it that program that we had promised since last year. So let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you this evening for tuning in to Benchcop Radio 107.1. It is always a humbling pleasure to share with you insights and information, and I hope that in our conversations that we learn from each other. I do so much from you, and I hope you too from me. And that we continue to do the three principles I always say. When we see things that are not in our interests, we must feel a certain way about it. We must. We're human beings. Whether it's our hungry brothers and sisters, we must feel a way about it. Whether it's the treatment of our athletes, we must. If it's not something that it's putting a frown on our face and not a smile, we must say something. Whether it's people telling us take a 619 and a bird for a cat, we must. We in Papu, we must say something about it. So that becomes how we feel about it. And second, we must say something about it. And third, we must do something about it. We must get involved. So that is what I part with you this evening. I thank you again for your indulgence and say that as Guyanese, let us try our best to get involved, to be involved, and to stay involved in the issue of governance and everything else in Guyana. So Lemon, I think we've arrived at my time. Thank you all for having me on, and good evening. May Almighty God richly bless each and every one.
So, this is attorney Shellen Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, The phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.
What is the difference between the ordinary thief and a political thief? Number one, the ordinary thief steals your money, your bag, your watch, and your jewelry, isn't it? But the political thief steals your future, your career, your education, your health, and your business. Number two, the hilarious part is that the ordinary thief will choose whom to rob. But you are the one who choose the political thief to rob you. Because we choose them. We vote them. We blindly say we are not blind. Who is deceiving who? The ridiculous part of the whole issue is that we will fight to defend and protect our belongings from the ordinary thief. Is it not? But we fight each other to defend and protect the political thief. Is that not what we do? Thugs will be fighting themselves to protect those that are stealing our career, stealing our joy, stealing our health, stealing our success. What a shame. What a travesty. It calls for us to think and think deep. The stage we are in as a country is not a stage where you become an onlooker. You have become an onlooker for too long. You must get ready to put your hands to the plow and be part of the process. It's not just about PVC, carry PVC. You must be in the kitchen where it is being determined. You must be there where the decisions are being made. If we are there in our numbers, they cannot outnumber us. But you leave it aloof. Oh, it's too dirty. It's a dirty game. And then the dirty guy is getting to the game of play. And you are there not showing up. And when they begin to make the decisions, you will know whether it's a dirty game or not. The result is always dirty on yours. Dirty on your health. Dirty on your business. Dirty on your success and your career. I hope that is stirring up something in you.